You're tightening everything up. You're restricting and constricting airflow. And there's also a hormonal thing that's taking place. You're getting an adrenaline dump and a cortisol dump in your body because the brain is being informed that, oh, we're under threat. Defend. So when you're sitting like this, you're kind of like in threat, defensive. You're in a defensive mode. But when you're up like this, I can just feel it. Just feel a difference.
Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Great to have you here, friends. This is a different episode for the podcast here because we're going to take a deep dive into your voice and your presence, specifically helping you if you get nervous or anxious when presenting web designs or presenting in even a small group. This is something I know all web designers struggle with. Typically, I sure as heck did. I was nervous as heck when I was presenting my networking group, but I learned over the years how to contain that and control that a little bit. And man, I wish I would have heard this conversation that you're going to hear today prior to that, because I have none other than the voiceover man himself of Pat Flynn's podcast, Smart Passive Income. So if you've been a fan of that show, you've likely heard this.
Welcome to the Smart Passive Income Podcast, where it's all about working hard now so you can sit back and reap the benefits later.
But that's not actually his real voice. In fact, this is what John really sounds like.
And just so you know what I really sound like, this is my real voice.
So not only are we going to talk about voice today, presence, and how to speak and be confident in sales meetings and group settings, but we're going to talk a lot about how your body as a whole plays into running your business. And man, I took a lot away out of this. So I want to thank John. What an honor to have him on. Learned a lot. And I think you will as well. We do mention this. He is the author of a new ebook, The Voiceover Athlete, which I've actually gone through. And it comes with a little mini video course if you'd like to go through it, where he has exercises that we talk about later on. So I'd recommend it. We will have that linked at the show notes for this episode, which can be found at joshhall.co/370. All right, here's John. John, thank you for taking some time to chat today. I just told you before we hit record, I feel like I'm talking to a bit of a rock star. I've been a fan of Pat Flynn's podcast, the Smart Passive Income podcast, for years. And subsequently, I've heard your voice almost every week for years as you're doing some voiceover work. And first of all, thank you for taking some time to chat today, because I feel like my industry of web designers, some people may think, why would we need to dive into voice and voice work? But I've found many a time in my experience in meetings or on calls that my voice gets weak. Mm-hmm. And the reason this is really important for me is I remember early in my journey, I did a presentation for my mom's Corvette club, and I presented their new website that I was about to build for them.
Cool.
And I could not stop coughing. I got a little nervous and my voice tensed up, and it was like my nose started dripping, and then I just was like coughing, and thankfully she got me some water, but it was honestly pretty embarrassing. And then I realized, like, I actually need to think more about my voice and how I present. So for all those reasons and more, I'm so excited to chat with you.
No, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Give us, if you would, just a bit of your backstory and what you do in voiceover and voice work.
Okay. Where do you want the story to start? From my first interests or my career?
I guess, career. Like what, if somebody wonders, what does a voiceover do? What does that entail? What type of things do you do with your voice? My
primary function is I'm the commercial production director for a radio station in Boston. It's Mix 104.1, WWBX. And speaking of dry throats, I've been in that current capacity since late 2001, Before that, I was at another station, Oldies 103. And so I voice, edit, and produce radio commercials. It was a CBS owned and operated station for most of those years. Back in 2017, it merged with a company called Entercom, which is now Odyssey. So you may hear if you listen to radio there. But growing up, I had seen the impact of people having a career. And then back in the 90s, I think there was a book called Who Moved My Cheese? And basically observing life, the worst number in anything is one of anything. And if you have one source of income, one data backup, one microphone, if something goes wrong, you're kind of stuck. And so I had taken it upon myself to study marketing. And I said, radio is a great business. It's a fun business, but it's still a business. And it's about getting ratings and charging advertisers for the access to that audience. And if they decide, well, this format isn't working well, then we're going to blow out everybody and hire a new staff. And that's back when, there wasn't all this artificial intelligence now with this voice synthesis. And so I was learning, first of all, that it's easier to keep a customer than to go out, and cheaper to keep a customer than to go out and get a new one. So I was studying marketing, and there's a point to all of this. And I wanted to create very effective radio commercials for people who had invested in the station because I wanted them to come back. And sometimes you have to do things a little differently than what is supposed to sound like. And Josh, the longer you and I spend on this thing, the more voices will come out. I promise.
Oh, I'm so excited.
And it just happens. At any rate, I was trying to write commercials and get people to see that, if it doesn't just sound like a radio commercial, but you notice it and it gets your attention, then it's working. And so I decided I needed to apply that to my business. And so I started my own freelance business on the side. A lot of voice folks do. So I've done so many things. I mentioned it briefly in my conversation with Pat. One of the cool aspects of my gig as a voiceover talent is I get exposed to so many different things. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of voiceovers for video games, did some creature sounds for Atari games, a bunch of other smaller video game companies, all kinds of different things. I've done a few audiobooks. Candidly, audiobooks aren't my jam just because they take so long. And talk about stamina, vocal stamina. You definitely need that. I've done promos. I've done obviously a lot of podcast work, and I have a couple of my own shows. So anything that has a voice, I call myself the ubiquitous unknown. I'm everywhere, but nobody knows who I am. So, messages on hold, all kinds of things, anything that needs a voice. I've done a lot of corporate training narration, all that kind of good stuff.
Well, the multiple voices within the span of an hour. Listen, I'm a dad of 3 under 6. I've got 2 golden retrievers, so I probably sound like I'm, managing multiple personalities with all the different voices that go on in the span of an hour. But I think it is interesting. You mentioned a couple of things really interesting there, but what I would love to get to for this is to really dive into how to improve our speaking and our voice, especially for those who are doing extended calls, speaking engagements. I'm getting into that place now where I'm going to be doing a little more speaking, and it's new territory for me. And I know myself because I'm a talker. I can wear my voice out pretty quick. Mm-hmm. And today, for example, after this, I have a coaching call with my web design community, and I know by 3 or 4 o'clock today, I'll probably be, up here. So I think the voice is fascinating. And you tell me, John, I feel like nowadays there may be a more opportunity to stand out when you are well-spoken and when you have a voice that is different than everybody else. Would you agree? Like, do you feel like it's almost a superpower now to have a strong stamina-based voice?
There's a concept called presence, and sure. Here's the thing. If you're going to be speaking in public, I know I spent a lot of time alone in a room, but I've done a fair amount of public speaking too. In a past life, I used to be a lobbyist. And, you'd go and give presentations on how some piece of legislation was going to impact. I worked in the real estate industry. I was working for them, and I'd say, I'd talk about some law that was going to change how they got their licenses or something. And then the regulators would come in and they would say, and I would have to go out and give another speech and say, you remember everything I said last time I was here? Yes. Forget all that. It's now this. And so anyway, I've done a fair amount of public speaking. And the biggest takeaway I got from when I was learning how to speak in front of an audience was you have to understand that the audience is rooting for you. They want you to do a good job because they don't want to sit there and go, oh God, you don't want to be distracting from the message that you want to give to the people who are listening to you. So anything that you can support that goal. What's your message? You may have, for your industry, you may have a new tech support chat feature that you can implement, or those pop-ups that validate somebody made a purchase or something like that. Some new feature, some new widget. You may have that. You may have a new coaching program that you want to roll out. You may want to talk about how the new algorithms for Google search are going to impact your search engine optimization, whatever it is. I'm really going out of my depth here by trying to pull in your jargon, but at any rate, yeah, you want to basically, if you can get up in front of an audience, composed, confident, and prepared, and deliver your message in a way that people can understand what you're trying to accomplish. And then if there's an action to take the action that you as the presenter want them to do, then you've succeeded.
So most every web designer fears and dreads getting up in front of an audience of any size. And I don't know what number would constitute an audience, but for me, I remember vividly going to what I thought was going to be a one-on-one or one-on-two meeting. Mm-hmm. And it was a board of directors for this nonprofit I was building a website for. And it was like 9 people or something. That felt so different than a couple people. So I remember feeling nervous and my voice reflected that. What can we do to calm nerves? Before we even dive into like some nitty gritty on like voice stuff, I would love to know, what are some of the tips that you have for like calming yourself down when you are nervous, or even if it's a good anxious energy? What are some of your recommendations to calm your nerves?
Sure. Okay. There's a little checklist that I go through. So people a lot of times will have this imposter syndrome thing going on. It's like, why am I here? Who am I to be doing this? First of all, if you've been invited to speak, then obviously the person who's extended the invitation thinks you're qualified to speak on that topic. So reassure yourself that they want you there for a reason, right? The other thing that it's easier said than done, but why is it, you have to ask the question, why is it different to speak in front of, I don't know know if you can hear Trudy in the background there.
That's all right. Puppies are always welcome on the podcast.
Okay, well, good. Thank you for that.
It's casual around here.
Okay, well, it's casual here today too. Usually I'm like, retake. Anyway, so you've been asked to speak for a reason, but why is it different mentally if you're just speaking with one or two people versus a room full of people? They're still just people. And it's easier said than done. And I totally understand that. And also, and which brings me to another point, thrive on that energy. You kind of hinted at it. If you're nervous, that's a good thing because it means you care. It means you want to do a good job. And you've got to kind of just put out, and I'm speaking from experience. I do it too. And you just have to shut those voices out and say, no, I'm here for a reason. I'm here because they want me to share this message, this information. And then there's a real practical tip that you can do, and it's called the power pose. Have you ever heard of
that? No.
There is an actual physical response that you can create by your posture is everything. You can, and if you're going to go on stage, I do this. You got to psych yourself up. And I'll give you some concrete examples, but if you want to literally manifest some physical confidence, you want to stand up and you want to extend your arms out and you want to lengthen yourself and just stand there. It's called the power pose. And what happens with that posture, body language, boy, we can go into a deep dive here, Josh, because I've done a lot of research in this.
I'm in for it. Yeah, let's do it.
Your body, regardless of gender, when you're in this pose, you release testosterone. And testosterone is a confidence booster. It's what gets you ready to hunt, to defend, to fight if necessary, to run. It's the natural thing that happens when you've got that adrenaline surge. The human body is an amazing thing. I don't know how it works. It's just, there's so many things. Think about all the things that we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. We're sitting here in our chairs. We're looking at each other through space and time.
Did Amazon come? Perfect timing.
Amazon, UPS, FedEx, mail carrier. Trudy is our guardian. At any rate, we just think about it. We're smelling, we're hearing, we're breathing, we're looking, we're feeling temperature, we're processing the food and the drink that we've had already today. We're coming up with ideas. You're listening, you're processing the information. You're also monitoring the sound levels. I'm trying to not get distracted by my dog chasing trucks from outside, so there's so many things that we're doing all at once. And if you just stop and we're breathing, the heart's beating and we're creating all of these chemical reactions within us. And so posture leads to a physicality, a hormonal cascade that takes place in the body. We are very good at reading humans through years and years of evolution. You can tell when somebody's down just by looking at their posture, right?
Yeah, the slump, the down slump. Yeah.
The downward look, the downcast face, the rounded shoulders. It's a defensive posture. It's a threat posture. When you stand up and you expose your visceral organs, basically, and your arms are out like this, and your hands are wide open, and you've got great posture, the body responds. There's a confidence there. And if you can get yourself for 5 minutes or so, just off by yourself, strike a pose, strike that pose, just prep yourself. You will I feel it just sitting here doing it with you. I mean, I'm much more animated in my delivery than I'm just sitting here, Josh, and it's cold here today and all that kind of stuff. But if I was to sit here and talk to you like this, it's a disconnect. It's like his posture isn't matching his voice. Look at how he's rounded down, but he's talking. It almost looks like I'm angry. Blah, 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 blah. Right. But if I'm like this and I'm talking, look, the smile just happens on my face. I get excited, all of that. So the power pose is a big deal. So if you're going to be speaking in public or you're going to, go into a session or you're going to make a presentation or whatever, that's a technique I employ all the time. The other thing is you've got to switch this thing, say, you know what? This is my room. I own this room right now. This is my time. They've asked me here, and you've got to just push yourself there. It's called voice acting for a reason. Assume a virtue if you have it not.
Interesting. Yeah.
You've got to do it if that's what you want to do. Even if you don't want to do it, your audience is rooting for you. So I'll give you a couple of real examples. It was one of the first gigs that I got hired for. I think it was a newspaper, Cleveland.com. You're out in Ohio.
Yeah, I'm in Columbus. Yeah, not too far.
Okay, so I did an ad for Cleveland.com, and they hired me for this guy. This voice here was just almost Pat Flynn, but not quite. And so, anyhow, I'm in there, and I'm in the booth. The agency's there. The recording engineer is there. I'm in this little booth, and the ad agency owner's there, the agency rep's there. It's like this conference room. You talk about a conference room, and they're all sitting there. And then they've got the client on speakerphone, and I'm in the booth. And so they've got the speaker monitor out in the conference room, and they're listening. And so the guy, I'm from Boston. So what I'm about to share, I was like, if this guy only knew what an insult, he's like, he sounds like he's from New York. I'm like, heresy. No. Anyway, so, but you talk about it. They call you back in, and they say they got it. And, so in my production gig studio, it's like, there are a lot of spots coming through. You might have to deal with 15, 20 different commercials during the day. So I'm in there for like an hour and a half reading a 30-second commercial. And I'm hearing the engineer go, Cleveland.com, take 29.
Oh, God.
35, take 43. And I'm going, so during a break, I walk out to the recording engineer and I say, and I'm having this freak out moment in the studio, right? Because they're saying, maybe take it this way. Maybe take it that way. And they're rewriting a script and they're scratching out stuff. And my script is just I need a map to get through it. I'm going, wow, how am I? But at that point, I'd almost memorized the script. And so I walk out to the engineer and go, so like, how many of these sessions do you do a day? And he goes, 2, maybe 3. I went, okay, I know what's going on here. And then I share this with you for a couple of reasons. One, understand the context in which you're working in. There's a backstory to any environment you're in. And if you don't kind of do the research on that, what you think is normal for you is not the norm for them. So here I am thinking, oh my God, they got to do 20 of these things or so today. And I'm sucking up all their time. Gotcha. And he's like, yeah, we got maybe another one. No, we don't have anything after you today. And this is like at 1:00 in the afternoon, and I'm still in there banging on this script. And So there's the context. It's like, okay, totally different frame of reference. Here's the client saying, we've paid for 4 hours of studio time. We better get the most out of that studio time. Let's work this guy. And I'm fine with that. I'll have fun with it. But in the meantime, I'm going, I'm never going to get hired again. I'm going to get blacklisted. This is it. This is like man, that was a short ride. Oh God, I'm totally psyching myself out. And then I went, no, shut up. In my head, shut up. You're here for a reason. They hired you. They wanted a right of first refusal. That's how badly they wanted you. And you've got to put that in your head. And lo and behold, not only did they run that commercial, but they renewed it twice. So I'd come home or check my mail and there'd be another royalty check in it. And I'd be like, hey, wow, I guess they really did like that.
Yeah. I'll talk for 4 hours for that. Heck yeah.
Oh yeah. It didn't take that long, but man, it was a stressful environment for me because I didn't know the context initially. But once I understood that took a lot of the pressure off of me. I was like, oh, okay. I'm not screwing this up. This is what they want. This is the process. So understand the context, and the power pose is a big thing. Does that help you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Both of those points are great, especially for web designers who don't know what they're going into. Often, like I said, I thought I was meeting, 1 or 2 people, and it was like a boardroom, and I was like next to a projector. It's a whole different feeling than sitting at Panera in a booth. It's a whole different vibe. And obviously just sitting and standing is a whole different vibe. I'm actually a lot more comfortable sitting with someone just because I did so many meetings for years at a coffee shop or at a restaurant where when I stand up, I really had to work on that. I was in a networking group that was hugely helpful for that, with standing and speaking and doing like a presentation every couple months. I was in a Toastmasters group, which was really helpful, really, really helpful. I would recommend it for everyone just to be a better speaker and be a better communicator. But those are great tips there. I am curious about the voice itself. What happens when we get nervous? What is happening with our voice? For somebody like me, who I just really haven't thought too much about the anatomy of what is in our voice. What happens when we get nervous?
Well, I alluded to it earlier with the power pose versus the threat. And in our technological world, we really are, there's a two-way street. So the body informs the mind and the mind informs the body. That's just neurology. There's also your brain has these things called mirror neurons. And what they do, how deep you want to go here, Josh?
As deep as you want. Yeah, okay, let's go.
So inside the brain. Here's the thing. I'm very much a person that believes in nature and that the body has everything that it needs, and that a lot of this other stuff that we're in now doesn't really match up with how the human body and brain have evolved over millennia. And, these computers and these wonderful gadgets called smartphones, they're like decades old. In the grand scheme of things, it's just in time. And so, but we're spending a lot of our time accommodating to using these things. And that takes a toll. And so if we spend a lot of time at our desks and computer, I do this, think about what happens here, right? You're rounding your shoulders. You're looking at your neck. There's a picture in my book. I'll show it to you here in the Voiceover Athlete. I go into a great deal about posture.
Oh, it's huge for web design. We call it code neck.
Code neck. Before computers, it was called caveman posture. So here's the picture.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So those arrows represent airflow. Okay. So if you're sitting like this and you're breathing in, you're tightening your throat. Just crane your neck forward and feel the difference. You're also pinching the nerves at right where your brainstem is.
Is this why, side note, so many radio people have the mic up high where they kind of talk into it upwards a little bit?
Yeah. Or they'll stand. A lot of folks stand. If I'm recording a spot, I'm typically standing because now look at that.
Yeah. This is a great challenge because I always tend to have my mic below and I kind of lean it over and into it. But now I'm feeling like I may experiment with keeping it up and like forcing myself to just get a little bit straighter. You know?
Yeah. The other, so have you ever heard of the threat posture?
No, I mean, I assume it's,
imagine somebody's got is standing 5 feet away from you and they've got a baseball and they just whip it at you. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Crouch.
You're going to go like
crouch,
this.
curl. Uh-huh.
Well, look how close this is to that. Right? And you're sitting there like this versus it's not that different. The only thing different is I've got my hands up, but if you're sitting like this with a mouse and a keyboard or you're reading stuff, that's postures. So when I say the mind informs the body and the body informs the mind, when the brain senses this posture, what do you think is happening chemically in your brain?
Yeah. Everything's probably tightening up through here too, literally.
You're tightening everything up. You're restricting and constricting airflow. And there's also a hormonal thing that's taking place. You're getting an adrenaline dump and a cortisol dump in your body because the brain is being informed that, oh, we're under threat. Defend. So when you're sitting like this, you're kind of like in threat, defensive. You're in a defensive mode. But when you're up like this, I can just feel it. Just feel a difference in that. So here's where we're going to go deep. PBS did a whole series on the brain, the human brain. And they did this experiment where people were put in front of a screen and they were shown faces of people, and the face was on the screen, flashed on the screen for maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds. And the person seeing the images had to say what emotion the expression on the person's face was demonstrating, happy, sad, angry, frustrated. It got very, very specific. And, there were very nuanced emotions. And they did it for I don't know how many pictures, let's just say 30 different expressions, calm versus anxious. And there's so much to this. And then what they did was they had people who had Botox done. And they put the same set of images in front of the folks that hadn't had Botox versus the group that had Botox done. And, the people who hadn't had any Botox got 95% or more accuracy on what the expressions were. The people who had Botox scored much lower. Because what Botox does is it prevents certain nerves from firing. And we interpret emotions when a person's smiling, you tend to smile back. If people are angry, you kind of get a little defensive looking, So there's messaging that's going on from the brain to the muscles and the nerves, but there's also messaging going from the nerves, like if I've got a frown, back to the brain. And so I mentioned mirror neurons before. If you're not able to make the expression to mirror the expression that the person you're conversing with, if you're not able to do it, you're not able to interpret the message that the person in front of you is giving you. Your ability to interpret conversation and context is diminished because you've impaired the messaging that your brain is receiving from your facial expressions. How baked is that? So this is one of the reasons why it's like, you ever have somebody who was like, oh, that person has had Botox?
Yeah.
How is it that, how do we know? We know.
I mean, it's just like seeing CG and being like, that looks really real, but I just know it's not. I could just tell. Exactly. You know, like we just know every little bit of faces and expression. What's interesting about this too, though, even before the voice, it's like, I remember when I started my business, I was going around to local businesses, and I used to be in a band. So I went into the recording studio we used to go to, and the producer there, I remember walking in and just being like, I'm web design. I'm doing website design and graphic design. And, anytime you need help with the website, I would love to be a help for you. And he said, I remember vividly, he said, I can see it in your face. Like I see it in your eyes, how excited you are about this. Yeah. And that just goes to show you how far just a little subtle change in posture and excitement, facial expressions can go. That translate right into business, by the way, because Absolutely. A client can know how you're really feeling based off expressions for sure.
And just to step out 30 feet from where you and I are right now, look what's happening here. You're talking and you're excited about it. And I'm sitting here smiling and I'm going, yeah. So this is all part of it. If we were having this, oh, Josh, before long, you're going to be like, oh, yes. You're going to be mirroring what I'm doing. Yeah. So there's this great book. It's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. And it was written, I think, in the 90s. It's a great read for everybody. I think a lot of things, there's so much social pressure now to conform to different things that we kind of discount that gut reaction or suppress it. And and this is what really hit this home for me, was he gives this example. Have you ever been driving in your car, Josh, and you just know that the person in front of you or the person coming up alongside of you is just going to cut in front of you, and you just know that's what they're going to do, and then they do it? Mm-hmm. Think about the scenario that you've made that assumption or prediction. Now, the brain does two things. It protects and it predicts. And it protects you based on what it predicts will happen based on past experience. Now, a lot of this stuff is just hardwired into the brain. So think about this. You're on a highway traveling in a metal box at 60 miles an hour. Maybe you're all by yourself. And then there's this other person in their own metal box travel along the highway at maybe 70 miles an hour, and they're just cruising along, and somehow, without maybe even making eye contact, you're predicting accurately that they're going to cut right in front of you. And so you start making adjustments. How do you think that happens? We're really good at reading other people. And so this whole thing about the power pose, and then, boy, this went so far away from voiceover, but it all.
But I know this is directly. I mean, what's interesting about this is you could have, went right into vocal techniques, but it's a great foundation that I feel like what's probably more important is the body as a whole, because I imagine there's no sense of talking about your throat if you're hunched over and not feeling a strong presence. In my book, I talk about a couple of principles that I've learned through my own self-discovery. And in my book, I explain
why I went through this process, because I was doing very well. I was making a lot of money. I had my full-time gig at the radio, thankfully still do. And I had a lot of freelance business coming in. I was making more money than I ever had in my life. And I got wound up with kidney stones. And I was like, this is stupid. Why am I, I can make all the money in the world, but if I'm not healthy, what's the point? I'm going to be going on. I mean, we've all seen it. There's enough people going to the hospital and medical tests and prescriptions and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to do that, but I still love what I do. And so I did this deep dive and stuff. And so one of the things is there's this principle called the arthrokinetic reflex. And what that means is that your brain has a map of your body. I'll give you an example. So it's a concept called proprioception. Your brain knows where your body is in space. If I were to say to you, Josh, take your right pinky, extend it, and touch the center of the back of your head, you can just do it, right?
Yeah.
Because you know where it is. Your brain has a map of where everything is. It's not like touch the, assuming that you have the ability.
I'm not like, oh, that was my eye.
Yeah,
Nope,
exactly. Yeah. We've seen things where people kind of, if they're blindfolded or they've had they went to the dentist and they had the Novocaine and they're going like this with the floor, it's like, what are you doing? I mean, why is that? Well, your map is shut off because you've numbed it for a while. And thankfully it wears off and you get it back again. Well, if we're not moving, or if we have jammed joints, do you know that a jammed joint in anywhere in your body will reduce your strength?
What do you mean by I don't know if I've heard the term jammed joint.
You ever cracked your knuckle or wrist or your elbow or something like that? Or you don't have good joint function because you've sat for 8 hours at a computer and you get up and you're like, oh,
things are snap, crackling and popping like a Rice Krispie cereal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Your feet, your hands. Think about how many joints are in your wrist and your fingers and in your feet. And I was, the first person who taught me this stuff, he's like, you got to get bigger shoes. And I'm like, why? Well, can you curl your toes? And I'm like, why would I need to do that? Well, because your toes do have joints, and, the concept of use it or lose it applies. Well, what happens is if you don't use it, you lose it. And there's this thing called sensory motor amnesia. And so it's like, if you ever feel like, oh, I can't feel that, or, this space in your body where it's just kind of like this void, you're supposed to be able to feel it. So my point in talking about all this is, and you mentioned it, is that, if you're hunched over and your body's not optimal, one of the taglines for my book is a healthy body means a healthy voice. And if I'm inflamed from eating foods, inflammation is basically the body's defense system. So if you've got an infection, inflammation's good because it's fighting it off. But if you've got, let's just use, the extreme. Let's say you've got a nut allergy and you eat nuts. That inflammatory response creates, asphyxiation, and it will kill you, But there's a gradation. There's not one extreme or the other. There's like a whole spectrum of inflammation in between. And if you're eating food that is inflaming your body, you might not feel it on a day-to-day basis, but over time, that's your immune system working. And eventually, if it doesn't get a rest, like anything else, it gets tired and it stops. And then it manifests itself in any myriad of diseases that if you do things to minimize the inflammation in your body, that you're going to feel better instantly, and when people go through these anti-inflammatory processes, and they lose weight. They say, well, yeah, but at most I'm just like peeing a bunch of water. Well, yeah, because you've been retaining all that water to cool the inflammation that's in your body. And what happens when you retain water? You swell up, you get arthritis, you can't move as well, and all that kind of stuff. So it all matters. And
it'd be an interesting case study to hear voices when somebody's like very obese and when they lose weight, and what the voice, how different the voice sounds. I'm going to pay attention to that. Like when you see celebrities lose a bunch of weight or something, I'm going to pay attention to what they sound like afterwards. Cause you can tell.
Idea. Yeah.
Sometimes when you listen to somebody, I mean, even just the very act of breathing, you can tell like this person's probably like very overweight. I listen to some podcasts. I'm a hockey guy, so listen to some hockey podcasts, and you can tell like they don't sound like they sound like they just walked up a bunch of steps to get here. Versus somebody who's more fit, and it's a lot easier. It just sounds easier to breathe, obviously getting into a whole different aspect of this, but
you want to give yourself every advantage, you know, I mean, and if it's there for you to take, why wouldn't you? You know, it's not costing anybody else anything. You know, it's not like you have to stomp on anybody or clear them out of the way. It's like, to do it, you just, you know, take care of yourself and all of that. I mean, am I perfect on this? By no means, but it's definitely a level of awareness. So to get back to your thing about what happens to the voice when you're tense, long way around, you know, it's when you're hunched over, I mean, I'm not doing anything to my voice, but you can hear a difference.
Yeah,
it's strained, you know, but if I sit up and I open that up and I drop my shoulder blades back and down, I've opened up, and you're going to sound better too, because people always say, oh, I hate the way my voice sounds. You know, that's because you hear your voice in a way no one ever else will or could, because two things. One, you're hearing it as it travels through you. You're also hearing it slightly behind your mouth, right? But you're in front of me, but they're also not hearing it as it travels through my skull and my chest and everywhere. You know, if I feel it in my arms, you know, so you hear your voice differently. But if you're here and you're hunched over versus here and open, you've got more resonance available. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to ask you about as a voiceover artist yourself, you've mentioned you've done a lot of different types of voices and types of sounds.
Yeah.
I have always been fascinated by voiceover work. I think in another life, I would love to be in some area of the industry, but I have learned more about, and you hit on this in your conversation with Pat, about how you can literally move your voice into different places in your body. This may be a perfect opportunity for you to show us your range, but how does that work? Because I would love to sit here and say, I could probably figure that out, but I feel like my voice sits nicely nestled halfway up my throat, headed back towards my nose. And I would love to talk deeper and have a more commanding presence. The Josh of the deep King Josh voice. But I just end up, the more I talk, the more I feel like my voice ends up just going up and back. So I would love to use some time here that we have left for almost a bit of coaching for me, which I know is going to help everyone else.
Yeah.
How do we move our voice, and where can it go?
Well, big thing. Well,
it can go anywhere you want to put it.
I have to ask you, let's limbo this. How low can you go, John? How low?
Way down here. But, you know, I have to.
Your voice is muscle, man. I mean, it's like, so did you hear how my voice just changed after
Going down here.
Voice is up here?
And now I'm talking in my regular voice. So the, this is hours and hours of misspent youth finally paying off. Any rate,
it is impressive. That's incredible to be able to go that high and that low.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
It's, yeah, I mean,
Is
it's
it more
almost,
diaphragm and breathing error?
yeah, well, yeah, there's all of that. I mean, kind of did some stuff with Pat because he was asking me how I make different voices, and you kind of led into it. But the biggest thing for you, you want to develop more of a more resonant sound, relaxation. Do you ever notice that in your morning when you wake up, you got morning voice? That's for a couple of reasons. One, there's some, right?
I was just going to say, I do the power washer when I wake up. Sometimes my kids, I'll be like, it's terrible now, but in the morning it gets really low and gurgly. And so I do the power washer and they love it because I literally sound like a power washer starting up and running.
Like the air compressor?
Yeah. Like a water power washer that I would be spraying off the house with, it runs like that motor runs, but when it starts up, it's like low and rumbly. I could do that first thing in the morning because my voice is just so low and relaxed. Yeah.
It's relaxed. You just hit on it. Your body has given itself a chance to heal. And so it's relaxed. And that's the thing. It's breathing technique. So there's a couple of breathing techniques I can share with you. I actually have a metronome on my phone and I set it to slightly under 60 counts per minute. I think it's 59 or 58 beats per second. And there's research that shows if you can breathe in and breathe out maybe 7 times a minute, that's a very relaxed pace. I believe I'm getting that right. But what you can do, what I do, if you really want to relax out, is you inhale for a count and then you exhale for double that count. So what typically happens for me when I do this practice is I get settled. I usually sit in my armchair over here and I get the metronome and it's on very, very low and it's in terms of volume. And I do a count of 3 to start. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, and then exhale for 6, 4, 5, 6. So there's a total count of 9, right? 3 and 6. And then inhale again. And then what happens is as I've settled down, because, you're moving around and your heart rate's up just a little bit and you're breathing and all that. And then once you settle down, you're going to find that initial count will be able to lengthen from 3 to maybe 4, maybe 6 sometimes. And then your body will tell you if you listen to it, you're not ready for that number yet. So by the time I've gotten it all the way up to like 10 and then 20. So then I'm doing 2 full breath cycles per minute. But that it's just as simple as like if you're doing and the double the duration on the exhale for 2 cycles is it takes 2 breath cycles of 3 and then 6. What the body does is it switches from a sympathetic nervous system to a parasympathetic nervous system. And the way that I remember it for myself is, and parasympathetic nervous system, that's when healing and digestion and relaxation kicks in. And so if you want to turn on that system by inhaling for a count of 3 and then doubling the exhale for 6 for a minimum of at least 2 cycles, it switches the nervous system over to the parasympathetic nervous system. And the way I remember the difference between the two is the sympathetic, it's sympathy. And when you have sympathy, that means something bad has happened. And so when you have sympathy for something, so if you're in the sympathetic nervous system all the time, go, 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 all that kind of stuff, that's functional and necessary, but that for really extended periods of time is bad because
Gotcha.
you're not digesting your food. Your body's not healing itself and repairing itself. So when you can turn on those things, there's that. So what I do is I just start at 3 and then 6, and then I kind of increase it out to 4 and 8, 5 and 10. Sometimes I push it out to 7 and 14, and then I go, I'm struggling on that 14 exhale. So I'll back it down, and sometimes 3 is too long to inhale. Sometimes I'm like, I'm good at 2, but the more I practice that, the longer those things can be. And I'll do that for like 20 minutes. And man, you come out of that.
You could record a Western. You could narrate a Western after that, I bet.
Oh my God. It's so amazing.
It's got to feel good too, right? Like I can feel when my voice is strained and it sounds like it's up in my throat.
Yeah. Well, think how close that is to your brain. Think about how much stuff is going on really close to your brain. The reason it's so close to your brain is because it's really important. Our eyes are basically external portions of our brain. We take 70% of the information, assuming you're sighted, 70% of the input comes through our vision system. Then your hearing, then your nose, taste. All these things are really important. And that's why it's so close. We're really beautifully designed. And so you got to take care of it. Some pills aren't they're just going to mask stuff. So if I could give 2, I'm not a doctor. Hear me now. Acknowledge I'm not a doctor or medical professional, but I will tell you 2 things. Refined vegetable oils. Get them out of your life. If you can stay away from the sunflower, safflower, canola oil, rapeseed oil, sesame oil, vegetable oils, those aren't really vegetables. It's not like they're taking carrots and celery and squeezing them and extruding the oil out of them.
Yeah, that's definitely not
happening. They're taking the seeds from those plants and putting them under extreme heat and pressure, and then they got to bleach it because the initial product is just horrible. And the brain, the body's immune system goes, what the heck is this stuff? And it's in everything. It's in everything. Avocado oil, olive oil, and butter. That's what I use. And because avocado and olive, they're getting the oil from the actual fruit, not the seed.
I wanted to ask you about like some practical preparations for a big presentation or when you're going to be speaking for a while. Real quick though, I wanted to just hit on the importance of the breath work. I'm so glad you mentioned that because as I've looked back at some of the times I presented, my biggest problem was breathing and being terrified of a pause. I feel like most people, if you're not used to presenting in some sort of fashion, the pause during a presentation is terrible because silence just is expanded in time when you're in front of people. What 1 second of silence in front of people feels like 10 when you're in front of them. And I have to remind myself with my calls and my live streams and the Q&As that I do that I don't have to be making a noise every freaking second of the entire call. No. I can take a breath and I can breathe. And then I can come back to it. And even that felt like 3 seconds. I bet that was like half a second. Glad you're right.
It's time compression. And that happens under stress and threat. So if you're up there on stage, I'm sure you've experienced this. You get up there and you're nervous and all that kind of stuff. But then once you're in, you settle down, right?
Yeah. Well, and going back to my roots as a drummer in a rock band, I was
going to ask you what you played. The drums?
Yeah, I played drums. Yeah, right up there. So,
I got my Neil Peart back here.
Oh, nice. Nice. Hey, I saw one of Neil's last concerts when Rush was in Columbus. So,
I was in Portland, Oregon when I saw one of they had like 3 shows left. It was
the 40 tour, the
The 40 tour, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we saw the same cycle. That's awesome.
So when they went from like the most modern stage all the way up to like the mirror ball and the gymnasium set.
It was super cool. My father-in-law is a diehard Rush guy, so I took him after I took his daughter away from him when I got married. But I took him to. I figured that was a nice trade-off, but I took him to that show. Yeah, it was really cool to see the stage.
You got the better end of that deal for sure, Sean.
That's what he said.
I did.
What is interesting about that, though, is that's when I learned about the whole time compression thing, because as a drummer, obviously everything in a live show revolves around the drummer. I hate to break it to everyone else. We are the most important. So the songs were super fast. Now, in my mind, the songs felt the exact same tempo and speed that we had always done them. But when I'm in front of a few hundred people, or in some cases thousands of people, the nerves of excitement, it wasn't like scared nervousness. It was just amped up excitement.
Yeah.
I had to really learn that when I'm performing live, this song, you're going to have to play like it feels slow for it to be the right time. So same thing when you're speaking.
Yeah.
To you, you may feel like you're speaking at a normal pace, but to everyone else, sometimes it's like, and I listened back to some of my presentations earlier on, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't breathe at all. I don't think I breathed. I don't think I had any breaths in like half an hour or so.
Yeah. And then of course that's going to get your voice tired.
Yes.
Really. Yeah. Diaphragmatic breathing is very important. Do you know what that is? I don't.
I wondered if that was kind of. I mean, I know I'm familiar. Your diaphragm is what everything is connected to right through here, where the air goes through. So I would imagine that your voice it's all about the diaphragm. I imagine it also goes back to the power pose. You open up your lungs, you open up your chest.
So the diaphragm is this muscle that basically sits at the base of your lungs and basically separates your lungs and heart from your visceral organs. And it acts like a bellows. You know what a bellows is to, it's really amazing. It's when it's not firing correctly, you get the hiccups. And so, that's what that is. And, but basically a lot of people, when they're sitting like this at the computer, they're tense and they're breathing up in their chest and their neck and in their shoulders. And if you're breathing up here, like up in here, it's not a deep breath. It's a shallow breath. Again, threat. Your brain is going, oh, we're under threat, shallow breaths, you want to calm yourself right down, that diaphragmatic breathing. And if you want to, for your viewers and listeners, if you take your hands like this and put them over the crest of your hip bones, when you take a diaphragmatic breath, you want to visualize breathing down in a way so that your finger and your thumb move. And your lungs are bigger than you think they are. They go down in the back. And we are very frontally focused visually, because that's where our eyes are. And we focus a lot of our concentration, particularly if you're working on a computer, everything is directed forward a lot. And what I would encourage your audience to do is visualize your back when you're breathing. Take a breath and just right now focus on your back. Feels different, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole different.
You do just think about lungs like right here, but not.
Yeah, you're just like, well, it's close. This is where my hands can go. It's harder to put them up and around. But, but if you visualize, and now just like visualize breathing, but down by your lower ribs on your back. Totally different experience, right? It just feels different. And so, it's not just front, it's all around. So that's the proprioception that I'm talking about.
Side note, it's one reason I did go through your course recently.
Yeah.
That was accompanied by your book. And it was cool to see like how many different stretches and things you can do around the voice. It was a good reminder of this conversation too, that voice is just, what is coming out is a reaction and the result of everything else that's going on, which I think is your your key point to all this about thinking about your body as a whole.
Have a practical example. If you're in pain, or if somebody's in pain, how do they talk?
Yeah, the voice is, it's up. It's like as high as it could go.
It's exactly.
Nobody's like, my toe, a brick hit my toe, and it hurts. It really hurts.
And people don't believe that because it's out of context, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, right. You're being funny now, Josh. And your big toe doesn't hurt you at all. It's like, oh my God, this brick hit my toe. And so if your brain is like distracted because it's trying to protect you. You ever twist your ankle and then you're kind of like walking on it, but then all of a sudden, maybe 2 days later, the rest of your body hurts because you're favoring the foot. So you're putting more work on this other leg. And so then your knee starts to hurt, and then your hip starts to hurt, and your back starts to hurt. It's all connected. Yeah. So like if you're distracted by discomfort, even if you're not aware of it, if you're not moving well, I guarantee you that you're not performing at the highest level you can. And it's all connected. It all matters. Everything impacts everything else. That's why, not to get off on it, but these specialists that say, oh, I focus on the second knuckle of your pinky. That's the kind of doctor I am. I'm a pinky doctor. Well, it's kind of ridiculous, right? I don't have as many, I think there are more videos on the hands, in the videos than our book. I know that. Yeah.
A lot of hands and a lot of, like neck and chest. And,
Think about, do you know what a homunculus is?
No, sounds like a Mediterranean appetizer.
Yeah. Have that with
I'll have the homunculus.
Peppers, anyway, no, homunculus is, it's a depiction of the human body scaled to the amount of brain resources that are devoted to it. So if it basically exaggerates, it's a weird looking thing. But basically, if your body was built in proportion to the amount of brain work, then you would have hands that would be about 5 feet big. Gotcha. You'd be about this tall. Your lips would be gigantic and your feet would be enormous because and your eyes would bug out because that's where the brain allocates its. Think about what your fingers do. It can sense temperature, texture, pressure. It can manipulate things. It can grab things. And all these joints take up a lot of space to fire them. I mean, think about all that stuff that they can do. Yeah. There's a direct correlation in lack of hand function and death. If you can't grab things, if you can't feed yourself, I mean, it gets to a point. I've seen people who's got have to grab their coffee cup like this and is shaking. I mean, it's sad, but the amount of information that your hands convey, they'll tell you when something's slipping out of your hand. And so you grab it, just all these little things. And so, the amount of release that you can get in your body by mobilizing your hands, it's incredible, Josh. If somebody hadn't shown this to me, I would have said, oh, you're crazy. But I've literally sat and worked different drills on my hands for 15 minutes or so. And I stand up, my shoulder, think about it. All those nerves have to travel from your neck all the way down your arms, and all that information, if you're jamming them up and you're only using them to type or click, imagine if you did a push-up every time you clicked your mouse. You'd be freaking jacked, right?
Most web designers would be ripped.
You'd be ripped. Click, click, click. How many times? just for a thing, I was in, editing some weather forecasts. I do some, they're not even weather forecasts. They're updates. They're 3 seconds long, but I do them for a number of markets. And so for each one of those little 3-second snippets, I counted 21 mouse clicks and drags for one 3-second thing.
Oh, I can't even imagine what we're doing, building websites and video work. I do a lot of post-production stuff. So my gosh.
I mean, it's going to sound self-serving, but folks, I mean, if you want to really open your hands up and reverse, you work on your hands.
Yeah.
You think I'm crazy. People are like, oh, dude, what are you talking about? Think about how many joints are in your fingers, in your hands, and your wrist. And there's multiple parts to your hand. There are fingers, palm, back of palm, and wrist. And you're like, yeah, dude, I get it. What's the big deal? It matters. Yeah. And if you're sitting in this posture, there's the other thing in the book that I talk about. It's called the SAID principle, SAID. And it says, it stands for specific adaptation to imposed demand. And in the book, I give a couple of examples. But have you ever seen a professional tennis player's forearm?
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know what that looks like versus, their racket hand versus their non-racket hand? This is like, it's like muscles, veins, and, all that kind of stuff. If you drive a car, I would invite you to look at if you drive, just a regular automatic car, I bet you dollars to donuts that your right calf muscle is a lot more defined than your left one.
Have you ever seen a picture of Nadal?
The what?
Nadal, the tennis player. Have you ever seen a picture of him?
No.
Look, after this or whatever you fancy, his left arm, he's a lefty. His left arm is like massive compared to his right. It's kind of a joke that like he only lifts weights on his left. I remember, gosh, this was years ago. I had a physical, like in school days, and they were like, do you carry your bag on your right shoulder? And I was like, yep. And they were like, you could literally see it. It's like a little bit lower than your other shoulder. I was like, I didn't even think about that.
And you're compensating.
Yeah.
And your thing, talk about posture. When you're sitting is you're practicing sitting. So you're literally, imagine if your muscles just shut off. You're going to fall out of the chair. You're sitting in that chair, holding yourself up for hours a day. That's basically an isometric hold, otherwise you'd fall out of the chair. So you're getting, I don't mean this in any way in a derogatory sense. This is the truth. You're getting really good at sitting and you're getting strong sitting. And so what happens is the body adapts to that demand. And so your hip flexor muscles are going to contract and your lower back muscles are going to extend around your backside to the bottom of your leg. Yep. And so you're going to get this contraction on one side and this extension on the other side. And what happens is that people walk around with their butts sticking out. And then what happens is that their lumbar compensates for it. So you get this curve in your lower back.
Yeah.
And they're like,
you can tell, I feel like you can tell, obviously this is the most common with older people. You can tell when somebody has a chair, like has a recliner. I told my wife recently, very timely, I was like, I'm never going to have an old guy chair because I know exactly where that leads.
Yeah.
It's just curved back. It's just like the slow decline, maybe a quick decline in some cases.
Yeah. Well, there's this posture here. It's called kyphosis, kyphotic posture. And think about what that's doing. It's compressing your lungs and your heart, and it's pressing down on your digestive system and your liver and all of that. It matters. So I'm not saying give up the computer. I can't. This is how we make our living now. But what I am saying and what you can do with this book is you can counteract, you can offset, the body has an amazing capacity to heal. And it's the only one you've got. And it's the place you're going to live for your entire life. I don't know who said that. I think it might have been Jim Rohn.
Probably Abraham Lincoln. That's where all the quotes.
Yeah. I mean, it was somebody a lot smarter than I, but when you think about it, it's true. It's with you all the time. And so it's like, you have to ask yourself, why am I, and I'm guilty, man, I like me some buffalo wings and blue cheese, it tastes good, but it's fried and, in vegetable oils with anti-foaming agents put in. Have you ever seen what goes into deep frying oil? Folks.
I kind of view that like hot dogs, like, good every once in a while. I don't want to know, I don't want to know what makes the sausage or the hot dogs in this case, but look, this is a great reminder about how one little aspect of like speaking well and having presence is a reflection of everything else going on. And as web designers, I don't think, or even just entrepreneurs and business owners, there's never a bad time to be reminded to get up, to stretch and work on those habits that definitely affect everything else. And I did want to give you a chance, John, while we wrap this up, your book, it's voiceover artist, but there's a lot more to it than that. It's kind of like if you would tell us about that. I have one final question for you I want to make sure we get to, but tell us about your book and where everyone can connect here with you.
Thank you for that opportunity. And I know I've kind of been all over the place here, but the core message to all of this is that your body, it matters. So the book is called The Voiceover Athlete.
Athlete.
Oh, that's okay. And the reason because it's called The Voiceover Athlete is if you use your body to do your job, which I do and you do, and everybody watching us and listening to us does, because if you don't have a body, you aren't able to do this or run, or all the things that you do require your body. And I say the healthy body means a healthy voice. It also means healthy everything else. So this book, I kind of alluded to how this all happened. I tell you my story. I was very active when I was younger, and then, I got away from all of that. And what this is, there's 170 different pictures. I don't know if this is reversed. It looks backwards on me.
Looks good on my end. Yeah.
Looks good on your end. That's all that matters. There's over 170 different photos where I take you through all of these different mobility exercises. And it goes from the jaw all the way through the neck, shoulders, elbows, wrists, hands, spine, thoracic cavity. And it changed my life.
It's awesome. And I definitely, like I said, I went through it. I know you have a video course that accompanies it, and it was very cool to actually go through that.
I would love your feedback. What was most impactful for you?
There were a couple of the exercises about stretching your neck in particular. I think because I do often sit and get tight through the chest and stuff. It was a good reminder about how much is actually going on in the neck in context, particularly of a voice, like how much strain is happening in your voice because of everything else that's connected and around to it. So it's just such a great reminder. And even just the breath work, and even for some of the exercises with the stretching in the neck, I remember doing and being like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that." Yeah, the jaw too. The one with the jaw, I specifically remember because I have a pretty weak jawline. I remember going through that and be like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I would have done this 10 years ago. I wish I would have started this."
The trachea is never too late.
Never too late. The trachea. Yeah. The moving that. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that unless you have a sibling who's choking you. You don't even think about moving your voice around.
Yeah. It's, so anyway, I know you wanted to ask me about vocal placement, but I think we touched on that with relaxation and breathing.
Yeah. No, that's huge. Yeah. And like I said, even everything we've covered up to this point with your presence and everything leading up to that, I mean, just the breath work, relaxation, that alone is going to drop a voice and make it sound more commanding, I imagine.
Yeah. And I think also the mindset, it's like, remember, they've asked you for a reason. It's the authority thing and the imposter syndrome. One quick story on that. I remember I was out in LA at Buzzy's recording studio. I was taking a workshop with a guy by the name of Pat Flynn, who has been a wonderful mentor for me. Pat's done thousands of animated characters. He was on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He did Krang, and he's all kinds of things. Anyway, brilliant talent. And I remember being out there in LA and in this studio and all these June Foray, who did the voice for Rocky, this flying squirrel and Rocky and Bullwinkle. I'm dating myself, but James Earl Jones, who did This Is CNN, all these names, these famous people, autographing the walls. And I'm standing in this studio and it was so cool. You walk into this room and it's quiet.
Dead silent.
Oh my God, it was amazing. And I'm standing in there going, what the heck am I doing here? Who am I to be standing in this room? Because I was in a room with like 10 or 11 other voice talent from all over. And I'm going, oh man. But then I was like, no, make the most of this moment, man. You're here. I flew all the way from Boston to LA. God love those poor folks out there. God. I mean, it's just awful what's happening. But it was, you gotta shut that critic out, take valuable criticism from people, but remember, people are rooting for you and they want you to do a good job. So I'm glad you liked the book, and there are videos that go along with it. Actually, the pictures in the book
from the videos, right? Yeah.
From there's screen captures of the video. And, there's a lot of stuff with the trachea mobility. And, the swallowing and practicing all of that.
I recommend it. Look, for my entire audience, every web designer is going to be in a meeting, going to be on a long call, sometimes stacked up, back to back, unexpected, whatever the situation is. I definitely recommend, John, your book.
Thank you.
Even if somebody doesn't want to be a voiceover artist, I like the term athlete just for that reason, because it is a physical thing. Yeah. So a lot of this has been great reminders. I have one selfish last question for you, but we'll have your website and the book linked in the show notes for this one. I don't think there'll be a copyright infringement, and Pat's a friend of mine, so I think I can ask this, but I've always wanted to hear the Pat Flynn Smart Passive Income podcast voice say, "You've been listening to the Web Design Business Podcast with Josh Hall." I think I could do that. Could I request that you do that for me live, just to hear what that would sound like?
You've been listening to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall.
That's great. Yes.
He's in the 614.
I was hoping you'd add handsome or something in there, but hey, we can work on that.
Here we go. Ready? Take two. Boop. You've been listening to the Web Design Business Podcast with your handsome host and father of three, Josh Hall.
My day is made. My year is made, and we just kicked off 2025 . So
did I get the right number of kids?
You got it. Yeah, you got it. You nailed it.
I was paying attention.
I'm going to send this to Pat and be like, hey, I know, John's not doing any voiceover for the podcast currently, so I stole him from you, but I'm taking his voice. We're going to keep it going.
There you go, man. I appreciate that. Pat has been wonderful to work with. I jokingly said to him, after we had finished up our conversation, I said, Pat, this has been a real trip to watch this whole thing take off for you from the very beginning to then watching how you grew this audience and your podcast and your business and all that kind of stuff. I said to him, I mentioned to my wife that I was going to be doing this. And I said, just kind of offhandedly, if I had known what this was going to turn turn into, I would have negotiated a royalty deal with him.
Right.
I don't think I'm talking out of school because he paused and he said, back then I probably would have agreed to that.
Yeah. Right. Sure. You can take 1%.
Yeah, no, I can't tell you. It's been a real trip. I mean, it's been brought people in business to me, but more than that, it's been kind of a weird experience because I'd be at different conferences and then somebody would find out that
you're the Pat Flynn guy.
You're that guy. Do the voice. And I'm like, come on, man.
Is that your biggest claim to fame, or do you have a bigger claim to fame than being the smart passive income guy?
Do I have a bigger claim to fame? That's a pretty good one. I've done a lot of neat things. I was on an exhibit at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. I don't know if it's still there, but it was for United Technologies. I've done stuff for Atari. Like I said, I've been working for CBS. I worked for CBS Radio for many years. And now it's Odyssey. I have been a very lucky guy career-wise. I had goals and I've had an opportunity to use some talents and put myself in situations where opportunities would open up. But I have been very, very fortunate. I just celebrated my 30th year in radio last year, and I'm still going. And I think a lot of that has to do with not being cocky, but confident. I get overwhelmed at times where I can have like 6 or 7 different production orders coming at me. And of course they want it now and the client needs to approve it before they go away for the long weekend, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, get in line. Everybody else wants that too. And, it's
sounds like the life of a web designer too.
Yeah. We're all running that game. And it's just, but I think a lot of it has to do with coming to the realization that I got to take care of this, because if this isn't working, I'm not working.
Yeah. And again, a lot of this convo was a great reminder of just how important our body as a whole is. We may type with our fingers, but it's connected to everything else. So a lot of good challenges in this one, John. I really appreciate your time and your challenging nature of just health first. And I know you've been through a lot and have really done a lot in that area to continue on. I've been really lucky. I had kidney stones and all that kind of stuff, but I have been very, very lucky health wise. I have family members who haven't been as fortunate, and you have this. I get very passionate about this. We need to take care of ourselves. The people out there. There's a healthcare industry out there, but we need to own our own health to a great extent before we go looking elsewhere for it. So, but I appreciate you, Josh, for asking me on the show and giving me an opportunity to share all of these sub passions that I have aside from voiceover and to promote the book and all of that kind of stuff. And so thank you. Heck yeah, man. Well, thanks for your time, John. Really appreciate it. And I got some work to do here. I'm excited to improve my voice and improve everything that it's connected to. So I appreciate it.
You are very welcome.
What fun. I hope you enjoyed this one. It was so awesome to talk to John. I hope you got some takeaways. You can share with John and I some of your favorite takeaways from this chat by leaving a comment at the show notes for this episode, which are going to be found at joshhall.co/370. Again, John does have a new ebook out called The Voiceover Athlete. I would recommend checking that out. That will be on the show notes page as well. And if you're like me and you want to actually see some of the exercises that John talked about a little bit in this chat and actually go through his little mini course that is like a video walkthrough of how to do little exercises before you speak, particularly in a group, I would recommend doing what I did and just picking up the free course. Or it's not free, it's a low cost. I think it's like $50, something like that. The voiceover course that comes with the book if you want it. So highly recommend it. I learned a lot from it, and I think you will too. I mean, this is the matter of sales happening for you or not sometimes when you're presenting confidently and talking clearly, not mumbling and muttering like I do sometimes on the show. Thank you for bearing with me. So I recommend checking it out. joshhall.co/370 to get all the show notes, links, resources, etc. And again, a big thanks to John for taking some time and sharing a lot with us in this one, right? Awesome. Go hit him up, say thanks, let him know you had some fun today listening to him, and Big thanks. So I'll see you on the next episode. Stay subscribed because we got some other big ones ahead.